Hey guys, Kevin Ismail for the series premiere of Limitless Season 1, Episode 1, of course, this is called Pilot, and this is a show that I wouldn't say it was, hyped out of my mind for or anything, I really wasn't looking forward to, Scream Queens or The Muppets, but I was looking forward to it. I heard good things about it, and I heard the movie was really good, and the TV series had potential to be very good, but I went in not watching the TV series. I didn't want to watch the TV series because I wanted to go into this pretty fresh. I wanted to go into this knowing it's its own thing, knowing it is connected to the movie, but not completely. I think you can go into this fresh without knowing the movie. That's what I heard at least, and I was interested in how this was going to be. And, so I checked it out, and by the way, guys, I'm not going to be reviewing this show, individually. I'll only review, the pilots, and then I'll review the season 1, of course, and so if you guys know how that works, but, for the first episode, I have to say, I really enjoy this show so far. I think it's going to end up being a very good show. One of the better shows of fall 2015, definitely. One of the better ones I've seen, at least. I personally really enjoyed it. And I think it could end up being really good. I do have some problems here and there, but I think overall it is a pretty good show. So let's just get into it. So we start right away with Brian, our main character, Brian. He is in trouble. He has to run to a subway station to get away, but then Rebecca corners her gun out, and he takes off running and steps onto the track and steps in front of a train, and he says he did nothing really wrong, but says he made a few mistakes in his life, including misdemeanors, drugs, and some detentions. And we get this really good narration. What I liked about this is that this got us away from any exposition that we really needed. We just get a really, about 10 minutes of a monologue, and it was very well done. So basically, he says he did nothing really wrong and says he made a few mistakes in his life, including misdemeanors, and he says he thought he might be a great musician. But then he never got his big break, and the band members quit one by one. Eli was the first to quit the band, and there's a note to remember that, and you really, right away, you feel for his character, because I think everyone's been through that situation where they've wanted to go somewhere in their life and it really hasn't worked out for them. I think a lot of people can relate to that, and that's something that right off the bat I was very impressed by. I'm like, all right, Brian's a really great character so far, definitely. So he's down to himself after the band all leaves him because, that was what he wanted to do. He wanted to be in this band, and they just left him, and he says he's calling the group, Rhea Borb's twin, and his dad asked to hear the music, and Brian says it's embargoed, and his dad, Dennis, collapsed, and then it happened again and again. No one knew why, and Brian goes to see his dad, who just had another scan, and Brian offers to stay with him, and Brian says he doesn't need to, but wants to help. Then his dad asks what he would do to help, and Brian realizes he can barely take care of himself, and we see him in a new temp job, and just things are not going well for him at all. He has to file meaningless forms, and he falls asleep at the files, and Eli wakes him up, and he's in a suit, he really seems like he's all dressed up and everything, and Eli says he can't believe he's the temp, and they go to lunch, and of course he hasn't seen Eli since he quit the band, so obviously this is awkward for both of them. So they go to lunch and talk, and Eli asks to hear his new music, and Brian admits he hasn't written a song in over a year, and just can't concentrate, and then says his dad is sick, and they're not sure what it is, and Brian says his dad might die, and he hasn't seen him accomplish anything, and Eli says he might be able to help, and hands him a clear pill, and he says we'll give him a jump start, and says it's a neuro enhancer. So Brian looks at it, and then considers, and he's not really sure what this is going to do, but he takes it anyway, and he kind of figured, why not take it? So he says he has nothing to lose, takes it. He's back at the filing job, and he pretty much thinks that Eli is fucking with him. He thinks he's playing a joke on him, and then the scales fell from his eyes, and his brain cranks up like crazy, and he notices a guy from a file that was in a fraternity news story about date rape, and Brian then pulls employees' files. He was done in 2 hours and says he sorted them into tiers of safe employees for sexual harassment risk, and then he tells her to break up with Teddy because she deserves better, and says she's going to get a promotion once she gets credit for this filing thing, and then says she could use the cash from the promotion to get her MBA. And he tells Jasmine she could run this place, and he leaves, and he says he feels like the world is his. He's basically in control of everything at this point, and he needs to decide what to do because he has all this power, and he doesn't really know what to do with it. So He borrows a guitar from a busker and then plays chess against 5 masters in the park and checkmates them all, gives a hot dog guy business advice, draws a crowd to his hip-hop guitar playing, and what I love about this scene is that it really went with, what if we had those powers? What would we do if, you just had these powers that could basically just control everything and everyone? And he reads through his doctor's files, medical textbooks looking for an answer, because he hasn't heard, obviously, this before. He doesn't know what this is. So he looks back at files and sees his grandparents in a photo on their honeymoon, and he constructs a family tree and figures out that it runs in the family. And he wakes up with a brain hangover. And Brian tells his dad that he has something called chromatosis, and says it runs in the family. He can't process iron. And his dad says he can't know that, and Brian explains that it's misdiagnosed and it's mistaken for dozens of other things, and he tells his dad the test he needs to get today to find out. And later, Brian gets a voicemail from his mom who says his dad has it but needs a liver transplant, and he knows he needs another pill and goes to see Eli. Eli's apartment, though, is a wreck, and basically Eli's on the floor dead. We don't know why. Brian checks his pocket for the pills and says the money clip was gone, and says Eli always kept a backup stash. He busts open the guitar where he knows Eli kept his spare stash. He finds it, pops a pill, then takes Eli's phone, and the FBI is there, and Brian makes it onto the fire escape. He says there's no easy way out, but he knows the strength is in his hands, and jumps laying them right before he runs off, and the cops are way behind. And Brian then calculates a plan, bit through busy traffic, and makes it through, then runs for a subway, but then he calculates different routes, and he considers the park, remembers there are more cops there now, and he sees a run across the street, and a fatal run-in with a car, and then we basically get back to the beginning of this episode, because he sees Rebecca, gogs her reaction, then jumps on the track, and he says he knows when the train will stop. He says if you remember math class, you know, the train comes closer, and then stops an inch from him. So he then runs under it, finds an abandoned truck, and scrambles into it, and the cops have no idea where he went to, and he jogs down the empty track unscathed and uncaught, and Rebecca tells her boss, Nazarene Awad, that the guy got away from 6 agents and knew the train would stop, and she asks why she sent them after Eli, and Nazarene explains to Rebecca and Boyle about NZT-48, and says it was a project, but it was halted when people died, and I'm assuming this had to do with the movie. I know Rebecca wasn't in the movie, but she definitely is talking about something that happened in the movie. I didn't see the movie, so Bill and Rebecca talk, and he asks why she didn't take the shot at Brian, and she says there's a lot of ricochet in a subway tunnel, and Brian talks to himself about how he can avoid suspension over Eli's death, because he doesn't want to, he doesn't know who killed him, and he doesn't want to think that he did it, and he turns the phone on, absorbs the contents, pops the SIM chip, and he figures Jay and Adam at the bank were also using NZT, and he goes to see them. So Rebecca's with Brian's parents and says have Adam call and surrender, and Marie, his mom, says Eli and Brian were friends and he would never hurt him, and his dad Dennis says he can't believe Brian is mixed up with a drug, but not that he would ever kill anyone, and Brian swaps out his coat since it matches his description on the news, and he goes to Jay's place and picks the lock with ease. And I love the scene where he's like, this is not the first time I picked a lock, and of course he's talking about with sex. I thought that was pretty funny. The show knows when to be funny, by the way, which is something I liked. And Jay is also dead, and it looks like suicide, but Brian thinks he was killed for NZT, and Brian decides he has no more time. He has time to make one more move before he comes down off the pill. So Rebecca's looking at case notes at her apartment. She sees her side table drawers open by her bed and turns, and Brian is in her place and says she got lost in her work and didn't hear him come in, and he says the gun isn't there, and says he can't tell her who killed Eli yet, and says she has resources and he doesn't, and together they will figure out who killed his friend, because obviously he wants to know who did this. And Brian tells Rebecca the 2 others at the bank were using NZT, and says Jay Winston is dead and it was made to look like a suicide. And he says he thinks the same person killed Eli and Jay, and he says someone's killing the people who are using it, and that right away is very compelling because we know that Brian is using NZT, so the same person that's going after them is probably going after Brian. So he hands her Jay's laptop and says he has emails about a guy asking what he was using to get ahead. She says he's a lying addict, and Brian says she didn't shoot him because she knows he didn't do it, and he glances at some books and says she lost someone to addiction, which is really sad, and he glances at photos and says it's her dad, and Rebecca says he's not smart, he's high, and basically she can relate to the same situation because she knows, he has a father that's in the risk of dying, and her father did die, and she tells him to leave, and he says he won't take her gun so she won't get in trouble. He looks at the wall of evidence about him, then asks about how his father is, and Rebecca says he looks sick, and Brian hits DTs when the pill wears off, and he didn't tell Rebecca the name of the third guy, Adam Honeycutt, and Rebecca talks to Boyle for help with the email, and he can't believe she's listening to Brian. She says he gave her good info, and left her the gun, and Brian tries to pick the lock at Jay's, but can't, and Adam says he didn't kill Eli or Jay, and says he's not a bad person, but he needs help, and Adam opens the door and says he believes him. So he glances in the hall, says Eli used to talk about him all the time, and was jealous of Brian for not giving up on his music, and because he did, and obviously that's why Eli was so upset about it, and Adam says he can help and offers him a pill, and Brian is in really bad shape at this point. He looks around Adam's apartment at the symmetry, then notices one plant is off and it's loose. He pulls it up and finds Eli's money clip there, and Adam comes back with a gun. Obviously, he doesn't want anyone to find this, including Eli. He takes a shot, and Brian dives out of the line of fire, and Adam nicks his leg when he shoots again, and he's got a really nasty he's got a really nasty bullet wound, like, right across his legs, and he runs out in the hall, grabs a fire extinguisher, bashes him in the head, and that was awesome. He limps around, then down the street. Adam comes after him. He sees him coming and sits down at a fountain, and Adam says that Eli was a snake, but Brian says he murdered him and is going to jail, and Adam asks if he's going to call the police. Adam says he can tell them that he shot the fugitive druggie, and Adam says he will find him and finish him unless someone with a badge gets him first or he bleeds out, and Adam then walks off, and Brian treats his wounded leg and then calls Rebecca. And she says Andrew is the mystery emailer, but Brian says Adam is the killer and shot him too. So Rebecca asks where he is, and he asks if she can patch up bullet wounds, and she writes a note to Boyle that he's shot. And my biggest thing with this is I feel like, I understand they want to make this a procedural show, but I really feel they could have made this a much more intriguing mystery. Like, they could have kept this as, like, the mystery of the season, is who's going after the NZT killers. I would have actually wanted them to do that for multiple episodes, but whatever, go figure. I get that they want to make this a procedural show, but I just feel that's kind of one very compelling plot point that just kind of went away and could have been very interesting. Especially because I think there's something better that they could have done with it that I will get into. So she writes a note to Boyle that he's shot, and he says he's innocent. She asks where the bullet is, and he says he thinks it's a graze, and she talks him through some first aid. She tells him to get a knife or tweezers and says to dig around his leg to get out anything that can infect him, and she talks to him about egg creams, and he says his mom always wanted to be a doctor, and instead he turned out to be a nothing, and it's pretty sad because, he had that dream of being this, rock star, and his mom always wanted to be a doctor, and Rebecca says he'll get through it. He tries, but passes out from the pain. They always say when you do things like that to think of something happy, and that's what he did. So he sees someone there in front of him as he passes out. He wakes up handcuffed to a bed with a nurse treating him, and she says she did some stitches, and he won't bleed out unless he got shot again. And then we see Eddie Mora, a.k.a. the main character from the movie, and it was awesome to see Bradley Cooper. And yeah, this was limited, and we're probably not going to see, no pun intended, just because the show's called Limitless, that was not intended, but, we do see Eddie again. We're not going to see him a lot on the show, but I did hear he's going to make cameos, he's going to make cameo appearances here and there. So I'm assuming now and then probably mid-season finale, then probably the finale. That's kind of what I think is going to happen. Or if people, really want to see him again, maybe I don't know. I feel like they're going to expand his role. Maybe this is, a recurring, but then they could expand his role if they want to, which could be very interesting. So Eddie asks Brian if he knows who he is, as Brian coughs, and he's in withdrawal from the NZT, and basically he says he's been tracking Brian since he first ran into the FBI, and here they are. So Brian asks why and says he's nobody, and Eddie will be president soon, and I love how casual he was. He's like, I'm thinking I might not do that. And he says, you get so much more time off in the U.S. Senate. I thought that was pretty funny. So he offers Brian an NZT pill to go find the killer, then asks what he'll do next. And he says his body craves it faster and faster, and soon he won't feel human. And Eddie says he takes one pill every morning. He can't remember the last time he felt bad. He indicates the nurse behind him and says it works on a cyclical, I don't know how to pronounce that word, cyclical enzyme system, and he says take one of those shots every so often. He can keep taking NZT, and he says Brian can have a life few imagine, and he talks about remembering being in his mother's womb and how it relaxes him. And Eddie says if things go the way he thinks, he'll have all the NZT he needs. And Eddie says he will let him die slowly and painfully as if he ever tells anyone that they spoke. And that is definitely very interesting, because I really feel at some point Brian's going to tell someone, and when that happens, then Eddie, I think, is going to play a much bigger role, and that really shows how the role is open. Like, if Brian tells anyone, Eddie's role becomes a lot more interesting and a lot bigger than we thought. So Eddie asks if he's ready to become someone who matters, and the nurse gives Brian a shot. Then Eddie gives him one last pill, and Brian looks at the money clip and thinks about who killed Eli. And you're probably thinking, why would Brian want to do this? If this guy is going to go after him, if he tells anyone, why would he try to do this? I think it's because Brian just doesn't really have much of a life, and he wants to do something. And now he has the chance to do that, so that's why he is actually doing something with his life. So the nurse gives Brian a shot, then Eddie gives him one last pill. Brian looks at the money clip and thinks about who killed Eli, and he sees that there's one piece of evidence Adam would not have gotten rid of. And Brian goes and takes a gun from a bank guard, and he says he's robbing the place and says to stay calm. He tells the teller she can hit the silent alarm that says to go ahead and call the FBI and ask for Rebecca. And obviously, the teller's like, you want me to call the FBI? And he sits and waits for her. She shows up and he says, Adam has a safety deposit box here. And says, and he says to go see what's inside. They open it and find jewels, cash, a watch, and in a watch it rattles. And Brian opens it up and shows her the NZT inside. And he shows that one has blood on it. And then we see Adam arrested for Eli's murder. So obviously he's after people with NZT, and he's arrested. But again, I was kind of upset because I felt like this could have been a little bit more compelling of a plot point, and they had to waste that in the first episode. So Nazarene calls Rebecca in and says they got brain scans from Brian. She says, now this is definitely very interesting, because this is definitely going to go somewhere. She says that Brian is immune to the side effects of NZT, and Nazarene says whoever created it is still out there, and Brian could help them find out. And obviously, Brian knows who created it. Eddie's the one that created it, but he can't tell them that Eddie did that, because obviously Eddie's going to kill him if he does that. So this is not going to end well for either of them, and this is definitely going to be very interesting, because Rebecca says that Brian's a good person, then says if he's going to take NZT away, he can be a resource and could be their resource, and she says they can put him to work and wipe out the charges against him, and Rebecca says that way they can watch him and use him, and says he could be more effective than all the agents combined, and Brian says to get his dad a new liver, and he's on board. He says they can move him up the transplant list or something. He says he'd do anything to save his dad, and Brian comes to see his dad at the hospital, hears he's getting a liver transplant, and basically things seem to be going well there. And Dennis says that the FBI lady came to tell him that Brian made this happen, and he asks what happened to him and says he looks different, and Brian says he'll tell him about it sometime. Dennis says he's changed his life from scared to hopeful and saved his life. He thanks his son, and it's a really touching scene. I like the bond that Brian and Dennis have. So Rebecca meets up with Brian and says he was right about her dad being an addict, and I like that she came clean about that, because you could clearly tell that it was bottling up inside of her, and she came clean about it. And she says her mom took her and her sister and moved away. She says he cleaned up, then came to see her after she joined the bureau, and she says he told her he would be a better person and had cleaned up. And she says 3 weeks later his body was found in the East River, and she says his eyes had a shine just like Brian's did on the subway platform, and Brian asked if that's why she didn't shoot him, and she says she thinks her dad was on NZT and wants to find out where it comes from. And again, this is not going to end well for anyone, because of course she's going to find out that Eddie did it, and if Eddie finds that out, he's probably going to think that Brian ratted on him. That's what he's probably going to think, and that's going to be very interesting. So she tells Brian that's his job now and says not to lie to her ever, and she hands him a packet of pills, and she says she couldn't help her dad, but maybe she can help him, and he pops an NZT, and he's limitless again, and that's how the episode ends. So overall, guys, I thought this was a really solid first episode. Really, my only complaint, like I said, is I feel the show does not need to be procedural. I understand that they want to do a different case, but this episode, I felt they could have kept the Adam plot going for a couple of episodes, because I think that could have been interesting. But I get that they want to be procedural. I understand that. I guess that's fine. But that's what they do. They want to, keep it. They want to keep a strictly procedural show. But they are gonna have some recurring storyline elements in there. Like, for example, Eddie coming after Brian. Rebecca obviously wants to find out who the creator is of this drug, and Eddie, of course, we know is the creator, and Eddie told Brian specifically, please don't, if you tell anyone, I'm going to kill you, so that's not going to go well for anyone. Now, I really like the acting in the show, I have to say. I think Jake McDorman is just as great as Bradley Cooper. He has so much energy in this role. I mean, and not just because of the drug he's taking, just in general, you get to his character, so much energy put into Brian Finch. He really is a great character. I like how relatable Brian Finch is as a character. You know, just him kind of being down his luck and now trying to get some direction in his life. That's really all he is. He's a man searching for direction, and the only reason he's doing this is because he's finally getting some direction. I really like that about his character. Jennifer Carpenter, I thought, was also really good as Rebecca. The thing I like about her character is that she's not just an FBI agent. You know, that's not what she is. She has a past. There's something she's dealing with, and that I think is very interesting. That's why shows like Minority Reports I don't like, because I want characters to be more than just FBI agents. I don't just want an FBI agent. Why is she an FBI agent? What's the reason for this? You know, what's her background? I want to know these things because that's what gives compelling characters, and this show clearly understands that. Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, however you pronounce her name, she's really good too as Naz. Not really too much to say about her, but I thought she was pretty good, and as is Hill Harper. I think the cast and ensemble is also very good. I really like Brian's parents as well. I think they do a very good job in the show. And Bradley Cooper, like I said, he's gonna make recurring appearances here and there, so we don't really know what's gonna happen with that. The directing for the show, I think, is very good. I like that the show isn't afraid to be fun at points. Like, it can be a lot of fun, but it can also be really serious. It's kind of a mixture of both comedy and drama, and I really like that, I have to say, because, you know, you can play this for laughs, and you can play this for really dramatic moments, and they did a very good job of doing both of those. The cinematography in this show looks like a movie. It's awesome. I mean, something I love about this show is when he's on drugs, the world is very clear, and it's very, like, you know, just like this. But then when he's on, you know, on drugs, you know, when I'm talking about when, you know, when he's on drugs, the world is very, like, colorful and very, like, just like if you were on drugs. It's very interesting, and I really like the way they handle that. The cinematography is one of the best things about the show. The screenplay as well, and I mean the teleplay. I really like the teleplay of this show. I think it's a very, interesting story, a very intriguing story, and this could be a show that I might decide to review individually. I might just do that. Honestly, I think I'm gonna do that, just because of how compelling I think this show could end up being. You know, I think this show is definitely gonna be one of the better shows, of 2015. A lot of people have said this show isn't original. I think it is original. I think the concept is cool. Yeah, it was based off a movie, but they're doing stuff with it that the movie didn't do. I don't know what the movie did, but I know the movie did other stuff, and I think definitely just incorporating that element of the movie, it worked very well here, and I'm very interested in seeing where they go from here, because it could get very interesting. There's a lot of places they could go with this story, and I'm very interested in seeing what happens next. So I honestly think I might review the show individually too, guys. I don't know. I think I will. I really like where the show is going. I think the show really is definitely one of the better pilots I have seen of the fall 2015 TV series, which there haven't been too many bad ones. The only two I've really been just iffy on is Scream Queens and Minority Report. Minority Report I really didn't like at all. You guys know that. But I thought this was really good overall. But that's basically my review, Limitless. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what you guys saw this first episode. How does it compare to the movie for you? Do you think this show is going to be successful? I think it can be very successful. You know, I think they can draw in the audience just from Bradley Cooper alone. But also the plot, I think the plot is very compelling and very relatable, and I definitely really do like that. And I think this is a show that could get very good ratings and definitely be one of CBS's biggest hits. I don't watch a lot of CBS, but definitely Supergirl, Limitless, Life in Pieces, they're getting me to watch CBS. CBS has some really good shows this year, and I think this is definitely one of them. But that's basically my review. Hope you all enjoyed it, and we'll see you guys in my next video, which will be for a movie review, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.